morning, everybody. Madam Registrar, I believe that before we get formally into session, there is a statement that we need to hear, which is not actually part of the proceeding.
Good morning, goedemorgen, selamat pagi. Ladies and gentlemen, this year it is 50 years ago that the darkest period in post-colonial Indonesian history began. The mass killing of hundreds of thousands of innocent citizens, large-scale imprisonment under inhuman conditions, torture, slave labor, and forced disappearances, sexual violence, and other forms of persecution. Thousands of nation's most promising intellectual youth became exiled. The Indonesian Communist Party was destroyed. The military dictatorship under later President Suharto sharply curtailed the human rights of Indonesian citizens. To this day, impunity for the perpetrator of these crimes against humanity reigns, and the victims are not rehabilitated, but instead seen as guilty for the suffering they and their family members experience. Not only impunity, but persecution itself continues. Militia are allowed or stimulated to break up meetings of victims. A Swedish national and Indonesian exile and member of our IPT network was deported after visiting the mass grave where his father was buried. There is continued harassment of human rights defenders, and 2 weeks ago, the launching of books, an exhibition, and a film showing on this period scheduled at the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival had to be cancelled, as the organizers were threatened that they might lose the permit for entire event. Indonesian students volunteering for this tribunal were warned that they might lose their scholarship. Thus, the rights continually guaranteed to Indonesian citizens of free speech, of association, are not upheld. The propaganda campaign that incited the army and its associated militia to commit these crimes against humanity has still not been officially debunked. The Communist Party is still portrayed as anti-religious, intent on breaking up the nation, and as stimulating sexual perversion. Even human rights defenders these days are accused of being new style of communists. History book repeat that lies produced in the murder of the general on October 1st, 1965. The extent of mass murder is not known. The state has not taken any responsibility for the mass crime committed under its jurisdiction, nor have other states who were aware of the large-scale killings at the time but did nothing to stop them. Indeed, provided the army with supplies they needed to carry out their criminal duties, accepted their responsibility. National effort to engage in a process of truth-finding prior to reconciliation so far have failed. The impressive 2012 report of the National Human Rights Commission in 6 regions, which should have formed the basis of comprehensive program of truth-finding, justice, and reconciliation, has not led to a follow-up from the National Attorney Office. The full report is still not released, its content hidden from public scrutiny. To this day, the Indonesian people are denied the right of truth, to justice, to rehabilitation, and the guarantee of non-recurrence. The Indonesian youth is brought up with lies and ignorance. The stigma of their grandparents and parents is carried over into the 3rd generation. It is time to break down the vicious cycle of denial, distortion, taboo, secrecy surrounding the event of 1965. Therefore, direct victims of the mass crime against humanity committed in Indonesia after October 1st, 1965, who are living both within Indonesia and abroad, and their family members, as well as human rights lawyers, activists, artists, journalists, and researchers who have long worked on this period, have come together to bring these crimes against humanity to international level. We have set up the foundation International People's Tribunal 1965 to organize the International People's Tribunal on 1965 crimes against humanity in Indonesia. We have collected material that bring before the tribunal to consider without fear and fervor. In this tribunal, the victim will speak out. They have been silenced and objective till now. The material brought before the tribunal will provide a public record of mass killing and other crimes humanity committed after October 1st, 1965. The tribunal will have opened up a space for public debate on the history of Indonesia, on its post-colonial ambition, on its effort to build social justice, on its attempt to establish the rule of law. The tribunal is a moral instrument to help break through the cycle of violence in Indonesia. We, the people who established this tribunal, say clearly, never again. We affirm the uncompromising hope that justice is possible in Indonesia and that human rights and rule of law are recognized and respected. Our aim is to stimulate a process of healing, to help Indonesia realize its own stated aims and potential to be a country in which the coming generation will live peacefully and secure life. Therefore, the truth must be established. The wounds in Indonesian society are too deep. The pattern of violence and oppression are firmly ingrained in the security apparatus and condoned by interested, powerful political and socio-economic groups. As long as Indonesia's history is distorted in people's mind and its educational system, the country cannot learn from its past mistake, and there is no guarantee the violence may not reoccur. As General Coordinator of the Foundation, APT 1965 set set up in 2014, I wish to thank all the people who have worked and still work so hard to make the tribunal, whose hearing start today, happen. In the first place, our panel of judges, Mireya Fanon Mendes, France, Kees Flinterman, John Gittings, Helen Jarvis, Geoffrey Nice, Sadi Shader, Sak Jacob, and our prosecutor, Todu Mulya Lubis as Chief Prosecutor, Antarini Arna, Bahrain Makmun, Uli Parulian Sihombe, Sri Suparyati, Agung Wijaya, Silke Studinsky, our registrar, Sylvia Sefard, our organizing committee, Helene van Klinken, coordinator volunteer and secretariat, Annette van Offenbeek, member OSI, Lea Pamungkas, coordinator media team, Ratna Saptari, member of OSI and also member editorials research report, Sri Tunrua, treasurer, Artin Utre, member UC, Sri Lestari Wahyuningrum, co-coordinator Indonesian team, Saskia Wiringha, chair, Foundation IPT, coordinator of research report. Our advisory board, Dolorosa Sinaga, Samsia Ahmad, Jan Berman, Martha Meyer, Nico Sulte Norholt, Joshua Oppenheimer, Jan Prom, Indai Sahor, Frederick de Flaming, Abraham de Swan, Galoh Wandita, Ben White, Herlambang Wiratraman. A special thanks to the witnesses and expert witnesses whose testimony support the indictment. It is their courage to testify in the tribunal that will bring the crimes against humanity committed to light, as well as the member of our media team and the many other volunteers. We also thank the many people who have contributed to our crowdfunding campaign and our other funders. This tribunal is dedicated in the first place to the victim and their family members, including those who were murdered or disappeared, as well as to the future generation in the hope they will be better able to assess honestly the past of their country. Justice for the victim means justice for the future of Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that statement. The tribunal is now formally in session. Madam Registrar, I start by reading a statement which has been prepared by all the judges. We say we accepted appointment as judges of this tribunal for these reasons. There is no doubt that the events of 1965 and after in Indonesia remain extremely important for Indonesia and for the world. We believe that the most probable and reliable account of the exact causes of what happened in 1965 and thereafter must be identified, and that this account is necessary if real, lasting, and just peace that includes reconciliation and reparation is to be achieved in Indonesia. It may then be possible to determine whether crimes were committed that should even after this passage of time, be dealt with. Our findings may provide impetus for the creation of concrete structures or processes like a Truth Commission and the implementation of recommendations made by the Indonesian National Commission for Human Rights, Komnas HAM. There will be a statement now read by one of my fellow judges, Helen Jarvis.
Selamat pagi semuanya. Atas nama kami 7 orang di sini yang datang untuk mengerjakan peranan kami dan menjalankan kewajiban sebagai hakim dalam pengadilan IPT ini, saya ingin mengucapkan kehormatan kami semuanya kepada ibu bapak yang hadir di sini, khususnya sebagai saksi-saksi dengan tujuan memberi keterangan dan penjelasan mengenai kejadian dari 50 tahun yang lalu. Kami semuanya mengerti betapa sulit dan berat keputusan ibu bapak untuk datang ke sini, begitu jauh dari kampung halaman dan tanah airnya, supaya membuka secara umum pengalamannya dari zaman lama, 50 tahun yang lalu, yang begitu pahit dan masih menyakitkan. Kami juga sadar bahwa ibu bapak harus menghadapi dan mengatasi begitu banyak hambatan dan kesulitan dalam perjalanan ke sini. Kami ingin mengucapkan terima kasih atas keberanian dan ketetapan hati dari saksi-saksi semuanya. Tanpa kehadiran ibu bapak sendiri dan tanpa kesaksian dan penelitian lain-lainnya, kami tidak bisa menjalankan tugas kami sebagai hakim dalam pengadilan IPT ini. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Madam Registrar, do we now have the prosecution?
Yes, the prosecution is going to make opening statement.
Is there anyone else present, apart from the prosecution, to represent any other party?
Is there any other representative from the government of Indonesia or any other party who wishes to address the panel of the judges? There's been no response to that.
We express our regret for that turn of events and hope that the matter may be rectified before the trial begins. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. My task is to read out the indictment. But before I do that, allow me to read out my opening statement. Let me begin my opening statement by asking one simple question. Why are we here? It is indeed very important to answer these questions because only by honestly answering the said questions, you would then know what to expect, what to achieve, and how to overcome any and all possible challenges that lie in front of us. I come all the way from Jakarta, together with most of the prosecutorial team. Most witnesses and experts come from various cities in Indonesia. The honorable judges too come from various countries. And the organizers mostly come from Jakarta and have a secretariat in Holland. We have spent countless hours preparing ourselves for this tribunal, and I believe we have also spent a great deal of hours going through all materials and initial submissions. Clearly, we will be spending days and perhaps months digesting and examining all the submissions, statements, and evidence. I cannot imagine how much energy and emotion will be spent to finally finish the works. And I'm pretty sure that it is not going to be easy at all. We will have to come to terms with ourselves. 50 years ago, on September 30th, in the middle of night, atrocities began. A number of military generals were killed and transported to Lubang Buaya, or Crocodile Hole, in the eastern part of Jakarta, where an Air Force base was located. Allegedly, the killing of those military generals were done by members of the Partai Komunis Indonesia, Indonesian Communist Party. It has been described further as an attempted coup d'etat to overthrow the government of President Sukarno. Interestingly, the killing of those military generals have been used as a justification to going up the Partai Komunis Indonesia, which was at that time considered the largest and the most militant party. Partai Komunis Indonesia has been accused as the party behind the failed coup, and the coup must be condemned. There has been no one single argument that can be used to justify the coup, especially since the party behind it is allegedly the party behind the violent movement against the governments in late 1940s, or what is known as the Madiun Affairs. Partai Komunis Indonesia, therefore, as a result, was declared as an enemy of the people, quote unquote, enemy of the nations, and of course must be crushed. Partai Komunis Indonesia, needless to say, was regarded as a traitor of the nations. Once someone is a traitor, that person will remain a traitor. It is under this kind of environment, the social psychology, that a massive killing of people associated with the Partai Komunis Indonesia was targeted. A killing that, according to various sources, resulted in the death of at least 500,000 people. Amnesty International came up with a higher number, namely close to 1 million people. Honestly, no one knows how many people have been brutally and inhumanly killed by the military and militias from various social organizations. It is perhaps one of the historical and human tragedies that need to be investigated further. Your Honors, 1965 is not only about mass killings of those regarded as communists or sympathizers of the Partai Komunis Indonesia. No one can deny that countless innocent people who are totally unrelated to Partai Komunis Indonesia were likewise tragically killed. They may have been friends, relatives, and spouses, and children who had nothing to do with the Partai Komunis Indonesia. They were killed simply because of their association with persons who happened to be members of or sympathizers of the Partai Komunis Indonesia. They were guilty by associations. The military and militia organizations that were involved in the mass killings unconstitutionally took the law into their own hands and rendered the verdict that those directly and indirectly related to the Partai Komunis Indonesia had to be killed. There had never been any due process of law. There had never been any recognitions of the presumption of innocence. And the mere fact that those people were associated with the Partai Komunis Indonesia has been used to condemn them as communists and therefore as deserving to be killed. No legal process was needed. Can you imagine the depth of darkness? That was the darkest years of Indonesia's history: rule of law, human rights, and human civilizations. After World War II, after Hitler and the Nazis, the mass killings in aftermath of 1965 in Indonesia must have been one of the worst atrocities in our human history. (1965) tells more than mass killings. 1965 also tells of enslavement, imprisonments, torture, sexual violence, persecutions, enforced disappearances, persecution through propaganda, and complicity of foreign countries, notably the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and Australia. No word can explain the magnitude of suffering experienced in bodies and minds of people. And the suffering is continuing. 50 years is not a short time by any means, and yet the wounds and pains stay in the blood of the people. The relatives and children and the grandchildren, not to mention the whole nation. The truth has to be told, and there's no condition for that. It is an absolute necessity that the truth is told in its entirety, honestly and sincerely. The wounds and pains will never be healed without truth-telling. History will not be completed without truths being unraveled. History cannot possibly be whitewashed. The burden is on our shoulders. We will carry the burden if we fail to unravel the truth. Because only by knowing the truth, we can start healing the wounds and the pains. Needless to say that it is a prerequisite that truth be told before we can proceed to find justice, to reconcile, and to forgive. Of course, no one will be able to forget the worst human tragedy that they face, but it is my belief that people will be able to come to terms, to reconcile with the past. Your Honors, as mentioned earlier, there are 9 counts which are part of crimes against humanity committed by the state of Indonesia, particularly the military and state apparatus, in concert with certain elements of social organizations. Moreover, it can be also stated that the state of Indonesia violated its inherent obligations as stipulated in customary international law. Its count will be further described with evidence supported by factual witnesses and experts if necessary. We will present them one by one when each respective count is submitted to the honorable judges in due time. It is our sincere hope that the honorable judges will have relatively complete description and evidence in order to fully understand what the so-called crimes against humanity committed by the state of Indonesia since 1965. Your Honor, the crimes have not stopped. Some of the crimes continue. They're continuing crimes. The stigma inherently attached to all relatives, spouses, and children of the alleged communists has not been lifted. The stigma has degraded the dignity of the persons. Your Honors, it is our sincere hope that Your Honors will be able to acquire all relevant materials and evidence, to examine them and to understand about the magnitude of gross and systematic violation of human rights. Because only by doing so, then your honors will be able to understand why our indictment charges the state of Indonesia committing crimes against humanity. Now, we may perhaps answer the question raised earlier. Why are we here? The answer is because we want to find the truth. The nation wants to find the truth. We have been waiting for more than 50 years. And despite all the efforts to persuade the government to initiate thorough investigations and legal action, ironically, we have seen no genuine attempt by the government to resolve all the gross and systematic violations of human rights which took place since 1965. The people associated with 1965 have always been stigmatized and discriminated against. It seems that they have been treated as pariah or outlaws. Nothing has changed, even though we entered the Reformasi era, where democracy, rule of law, and human rights seems to be more respected. Consciously and unconsciously, the attitude is to forget the past and focus more on the futures. What past is past, and don't look back. Don't open the wounds. But the wounds has never healed. It remains. It needs to be healed. And to heal it requires the truth to be told. Tirelessly, all the victims, together with human rights activists, continue to try to find the truth at all costs. We believe that the truth cannot be hidden all the time, and one day it will come into the light. It is in this connection we highly appreciate the investigation of National Commission of Human Rights, which concluded that what happened in 1965 onwards constitute crimes against humanity. There's light in the end of the tunnel, and that prompted us to also pursue the truth and justice in our own way that is less traveled by. This is what brought us here before you, Your Honor. We come all the way from Indonesia, not without rest. As human beings, we are nervous and worried. We are worried because in our beloved country, the matter related to 1965 atrocities is still taboo, not subject to discussion and deliberations. The government refuses to openly discuss the matter, and if there are discussions, then very likely those discussions will be banned. Like what happened in Ubud Writers and Readers Festival in Bali last week. Joshua Oppenheimer could not show his films, the act of killings and the look of silence to the public. Of course, this is not to say that no one attempted to hold the discussion and show the films. However, they will be confronted with police and possibly also groups who call themselves as anti-communists and also the Islamic Defenders Front. The bans have been brutal and violent. Your Honors, we cannot contemplate what will happen to us when we return home from here. It will be very likely that we will be accused of drying our dirty linens in the open, exposing the dark sides of our nations and society. And that, where therefore, will be regarded as traitors to the nations. We will not rule out the possibility of being questioned by the authorities, or even worse, detained. The fact that President Joko Widodo has already refused to apologize leads us to a conclusion that the government seemingly does not want to deal with anything related to the atrocities happened in 1965 onwards. Be that as it may, I have to underline the fact that we have come to a time where no delay is justified, and truth has to be found. No matter what, please bear in mind that most of the victims have died already, and those who are still alive are apparently already too old. Soon their time will come. Therefore, in the name of truth and justice, we must proceed with this tribunal with the hope that we will find the truth and we will see the light at the end of the tunnel. In the end, we really hope that the government will do its utmost to have a genuine reconciliation and what follows after that. After all, humanity should be regained. Wrong must be corrected and justice must be pursued. As I said earlier, this is not a tribunal in the legal sense, and you are not the judges vested with all the powers. We, the prosecutorial team, are not really prosecutors, but we are functioning and striving together to find the truth and justice. It is our hope that your courage and wisdom will take us to the harbor where we can sail back home with truth and justice in our hand. Your Honors, that was the opening statement, and now allow me to read out some part of the indictment. It's quite thick, 23 pages, but I will only read a few pages of them and let the other responsible prosecutors deal with that later. The prosecution of the International People Tribunals of 1965 Crimes Against Humanity in Indonesia charges the state of Indonesia with the commission of crimes against humanity and violation of customary international law provisions set forth below. The accused. 1. The state of Indonesia, in particular the armed forces under General and later President Suharto, as well as subsequent governments and the military and the militias under its control. 2. After the murder of the 6 generals and 1 lieutenant in the night of 30 September, 1 October 1965, by the 30 September movement, a campaign of annihilation of people and organizations associated with Indonesian Communist Party was waged. This campaign consisted of hate propaganda aimed at painting those alleged to belong to the PKI as atheists, immoral, anti-Pancasila, and hypersexual. 3. The army and the militias under its control kill hundreds of thousands of alleged members and sympathizers of the PKI, the Communist Party. Illegally detain hundreds of thousands of people, subjecting them to torture as well as sexual and gender-based violence. Further, forced labors and deportations, including the revocation of passports, occurred on a large scale. The campaign of hate propaganda continued to this day. 4. As a result of these acts and or omissions, a significant part of the national group of Indonesians, alleged members and sympathizers of the PKI, has been annihilated, its identity and history destroyed. In the process, Indonesian history as a whole has been rewritten. The social structure as found in middle 1965 profoundly changed, and the consequent course of history profoundly affected. To this day, survivors and victims are burdened with stigma and being held responsible for the acts committed against them. State responsibility under international law. 5. Pursuant to the articles on the responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts, the state of Indonesia is internationally responsible for the acts committed. These articles represent customary international law and thus legally binding on all states. 6. The primary principle underlying the articles as a whole is that the breach of international law by a state entails its international responsibility. This fundamental legal principle has been applied by various courts and tribunals on many occasions, both before and since the adoption of the articles by the United Nations General Assembly. 7. Further, under the law of state responsibility, facilitating the commission of an internationally wrongful act by other states, such as the perpetrations of crimes against humanity or other abusive behavior, the facilitating state may be held responsible for making such violations possible. That is to say, complicit behavior of states in aiding or assisting other states in violating international law is prohibited by law of state responsibility. 8. In addition to prohibiting aid and assistance regarding any violations of international law, the articles include an absolute prohibition on aiding and abetting of serious breaches of states' obligations arising under peremptory norms of international law. A breach is considered serious if it involves a gross or systematic failure by the state to fulfill the obligations in question. Today, the norms that are widely accepted as being peremptory in nature include the prohibition of aggression, genocide, slavery, apartheid, crimes against humanity, torture, and the right to self-determination. 9. The acts and or omissions referred to above were committed under the full responsibility of the state. General Suharto assumed immediately on October 2nd, 1965, de facto control of the capital and the armed forces. The new Operation Command for the Restoration of Security and Order, or COPCAMTIP, was established on 10 October to implement the liquidation of the Communist Party and alert sympathizers. On November 1st, General Suharto was appointed as the chief commander of the COPCAMTIP. Consequently, this command operated under the direct orders of General Suharto. 10. Under the command of the army and in alliance with conservative religious forces, widespread and violent student demonstration spearheaded a campaign to remove President Sukarno from power and annihilate the PKI, or the Communist Party. In March 1966, General Suharto wrested control from President Sukarno. The following year, he was appointed as President of State of Indonesia. 11. General Suharto and his associates immediately blamed the Communist Party as the masterminds of the G30S, a military propaganda campaign distributed pictures of the dead generals with claims that communists, particularly communist women, had tortured and murdered them before death. As a result of violence and demonstrations by the army and various youth groups, equipped and or supported by the military and the governments, targeting suspected communists soon broke out in Aceh, Central and East Java, before spreading all over Indonesia. Civilians were killed, raped, tortured, enslaved, or subjected to other crimes against humanity in their own homes or in public places. 12. On 21st December 1965, General Soeharto issued an order for military leaders around Indonesia to compile lists of members of Communist Party and Communist Party affiliated organizations in their respective areas. Civilians whose names were included in this list became the target for gross human rights violations, including murder, torture, and other crimes, as has been reported by the Indonesian National Commission for Human Rights. 13. In 1998, President Soeharto was forced to step down and the so-called Reformation period began. However, the power structure established under the rule of President Soeharto remained largely intact. To this day, no official apology has been pronounced, nor have any of the perpetrators been prosecuted. Impunity reigns to this day. Crimes against humanity. The prosecution is in full recognition of the fact that it is not a judicial body and therefore cannot make any submission with regard to individual criminal responsibility. It can, however, present evidence seeking to establish reasonable grounds that crimes against humanity have been committed so as to merit a criminal investigation by a competent national or international criminal court of justice. 13. Crimes against humanity has primarily developed through the evolution of customary international law. Unlike other international crimes, it has not been codified yet in an international treaty. 16. Fundamentally, crimes against humanity are inhuman acts which would constitute crimes in most of the world's national criminal law system, committed as part of widespread or systematic attack against civilians. Most importantly, the prohibition of crimes against humanity is the jus cogens norms of international law, meaning that derogation is not permitted under any circumstances. Consequently, the state has an obligation under international law to prosecute those responsible for the commission of such crimes, or to extradite them to states intending to pursue prosecutions. 17. The first prosecutions of crimes against humanity was conducted before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg in 1947, the topic of crimes against humanity was added to the International Law Commission agenda, mandated by the United Nations General Assembly, with the formulation and codification of the principle of international law recognized and reinforced in the Nuremberg Charter and Judgment. 18. Of significant importance is Control Council Law number 10, dated 20 December 1945, which deliberately abandoned the nexus requirement of armed conflict. The CCL-10 was issued by an international body, the Allied Control Council, and formed the basis for the prosecutions of international crimes in the zones of Germany. Moreover, after almost 50 years of in-depth considerations, the definition of crimes against humanity adopted by the ILC in its draft, quote in 1966, differs from the one used at the Nuremberg Tribunal by not requiring a nexus between such crimes and an armed conflict. 19. Subsequent ad hoc international criminal tribunal charged with the prosecution of crimes against humanity have tended to employ slightly different definitions of the crime. In some cases, abandon the nexus requirement of armed conflict altogether. The Permanent International Criminal Court, ICC, defines such crimes in its founding treaty. Rome stated as acts committed as part of a widespread or systematic attacks against any civilian populations. Its knowledge of the attack further, the Rome stated definition offers the most expansive list of specific criminal acts that may constitute crimes against humanity today. The definition provided by the Rome Statute is not to be considered as a definitive codification. However, it is our submission that it does reflect the latest consensus of the international community as a whole on this issue. Consequently, at this point in time, it may be considered the most authoritative definition of crimes against humanity. Additionally, the ILC's most recent draft articles on this topic, adopted in 2015, are in the same line. The definition of crimes against humanity has evolved over time and to the current juncture, whereby said crimes can be committed in armed conflicts and times of relative peace. Nevertheless, the crimes relevant to this indictment were committed at a time where the prevailing definition under customary international law was that contained in the Nuremberg Charter and required a nexus between the crimes as alleged and an armed conflict. It was not the case during the period relevant to this indictment. As stated above, already on December 20, 1945, the Allied Control Council issued the CCL-10 and renounced the nexus requirement of armed conflict. Therefore, immediately after the adoption of the Tribunal Charter, the international body further developed the definition of crimes against humanity, departing from the requirement that such crimes requires a link with armed conflict. In 2000, the Indonesian law number 26, adopted in its Article 9, the definition of crimes against humanity as contained in Article 7 of the Rome Statute, where no such nexus is required. Further, law number 26 has retroactive effect in the state of Indonesia as evidenced by Article 43, 44 and 47, providing for the establishment of an ad hoc human rights court, or in the alternative, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as a response to gross human rights violations committed prior to the entry into force of the law, and necessarily pursuant to Article 9. It is also of guidance that in the inquiry by the National Human Rights Commission into the 1965-66 events was undertaken pursuant to law number 26. In addition to its qualification of these events constituting crimes against humanity pursuant to Article 9 of said law. The prosecution asserts, therefore, the Article 9 of law number 26 in conjunction with Article 7 of the Rome Statute provides a sound basis on which to infer liability on the state of Indonesia. General allegations. 23. 1. All acts and/or omission charged were part of widespread and systematic attacks directed against the Communist Party and its alleged sympathizers. 2. At all times relevant to this indictment, the state of Indonesia was required to abide by the rules and customs of public international law. There are elaboration of all the charges, of all the counts, but it will be presented to you, Your Honors, later by responsible prosecutors, one by one. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you very much, Mr.